Was a former career diplomat. I'm very reluctant to ever say that a negotiation is at a dead end. Particularly dealing with the Middle East, one needs to be optimistic, even perhaps in the face of facts to the contrary. But it certainly seems to me, from all appearances, that the ceasefire negotiations, at least for the time being, are not going to be successfully concluded.
So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is watching it from their own time and space. My name is Dr. Shubhda Chaudhary, and this is Middle East Insights platform, a platform which is not funded and not partisan. So, today we are going to talk about the status of the ceasefire negotiations in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And with us, we have Ambassador Retired Gordon Gray. Now, I'm going to read his bio, and he has given me only a short bio, but I'll give you time to process it so that we understand the gravity of the speaker we are right now privileged with. Ambassador Gordon Gray is the Kuwait Professor of Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Affairs at Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Now you have to Google where it is. Prior to his retirement from the US government after 35 years of public service, which is more than the age of most of us. That is the years of public service experience that he has. Ambassador Gray was a deputy commandant at the National War College. He was the US ambassador to Tunisia from 2009 until 2012, which is the Arab uprising time. He witnessed the start of the Arab uprising and directing the US response. Imagine how interesting it is. Directing the US response in support of Tunisia's transition. Tunisia, meanwhile, is having an election right now. Ambassador Gray served also in Iraq as senior advisor to the ambassador from 2008 to 2009 and was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, also Middle Eastern Affairs as called as, from 2005 to 2008. His other foreign assignments include Egypt, Canada, Jordan, Pakistan, Morocco, where he began his career in the government as a Peace Corps volunteer. He twice received the Presidential Meritorious Service Award. It's very exemplary. Before joining the faculty at the Elliott School, Ambassador Gray was a professor of practice at Penn State School of International Affairs. Again, Google where it is, it's very famous. He was previously Chief Operating Officer at the Center for American Progress and before that, Executive Vice President at the National U.S. Arab Chamber of Commerce. Google that too. Ambassador Gray holds BA from Yale University. I hope you don't have to Google that. An MA from Columbia University and honorary MS from National Defense University. So with this, sir, we are very, very thankful for your presence and the privilege of your time.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much, sir. So starting with the topic, we are going to discuss about the status of the ceasefire negotiations in Israel and Palestine. So my first question to you, sir, is that we know that from the side of, and do correct me if I'm wrong, we know that from the side of US, it is CIA Director William Burns who is negotiating. From the side of Israel, we have the Israeli intelligence chief, head of domestic security, military hostage chief. We do not know who is negotiating or who is the representative from Egypt and Qatar as of now. At the same time, there is this, because Yahya Sinwar, no one knows if he is dead or alive. Some sources are saying that he's communicating through handwritten letters and that's why it's taking time to communicate with him in real time. Israel has supposedly drafted a plan, an exile plan, for all the Hamas officials to be transferred to Sudan with their consent. So how do you see the ceasefire negotiations developing? Is it already dead? Is there any life left in it? If I can talk in emotional rhetoric, does it have any gravity whatsoever?
Well, as a former career diplomat, I'm very reluctant to ever say that a negotiation is at a dead end. Particularly dealing with the Middle East, one needs to be optimistic, even perhaps in the face of facts to the contrary. But it certainly seems to me, from all appearances, that the ceasefire negotiations, at least for the time being, are not going to be successfully concluded. And I think that's for a number of reasons, which, with your permission, I'll enumerate. I think, first of all, there's no political will at the highest levels of either Hamas or the Israeli government to reach an agreement. And by that, I mean Hamas leader Sinwar and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think in the case of the Hamas leader, he is finally seeing an expansion of the conflict in the Middle East, which I strongly suspect he had been hoping for much earlier in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attacks that took place exactly 1 year ago today. So he does not seem to me to have an incentive to come to a negotiated settlement on this, at least for the time being. I think similarly for Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's got domestic constraints posed by his coalition, and particularly the far-right members of his coalition, who have made it clear they do not want to see a ceasefire. So I think that's one basket of reasons that explains why I'm not optimistic about the negotiations at the current time. The second one is just all of the developments that we've seen recently, the expansion of the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, and also the recent Iranian attack against Iran. I think by Iran against Israel. Those escalatory moves, both on Israel's northern border and the Iranian attacks, and quite possibly quite probably the Israeli retaliation, have assumed a priority, I think, for United States diplomatic efforts. In other words, trying to reduce those tensions. So that's a second basket of issues, and then the third basket of issues are the actual substance of the negotiations. There was, even before the escalations that I just mentioned, there was seemed to be a stumbling block on how long the ceasefire, if negotiated, how long that would last. Would it just be for 6 weeks? Would there be a second phase where it would be extended or not? There were strong differences in negotiations as far as the presence of Israeli troops. Hamas wanted them withdrawn. Israel has stated it wants them to remain on the Philadelphia corridor, which is the just inside Gaza, but the strip that separates Gaza from its border with Egypt. So for those three baskets of reasons, I'm unfortunately not very optimistic about the results or the possibility for a successful negotiation.
Yes, I also understand, sir, that right now specifically as we complete 1 year. I don't know if anniversary is the right term, but 1 year of the Israel-Hamas war.
Mhm.
The repercussions and the trauma which has been with all the victims, because right now everyone is a hostage, everyone, in the region. And the trauma that has engulfed everyone, the various emotional outbursts, ideological differences, the strong rhetoric that is being employed, the walkouts and the boycotts and all of it, it is making it very difficult to even have a communication space within those who are not in diplomacy. So
Mhm.
I can just imagine that at diplomatic network and level, it's very Herculean to bring different sides together. That being said, sir, how do you scrutinize Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz basically stating that the UN Secretary General António Guterres is a persona non grata, barring him from entering Israel. Yesterday, Antonio Guterres also issued a statement, a video message in which he mentioned about his own view, which he has been very clear about, of the hostages, consoling their families, giving condolences to them, but also talking about the wider implications of the conflict. So, how do you see this development right now, and was it necessary?
I don't think it was necessary. The declaration of the UN Secretary General as a persona non grata, I don't think it was necessary from a diplomatic perspective. The United Nations has not been a significant player in the diplomacy surrounding this issue. And when I say this issue, I'm talking about the conflict specifically between Israel and Hamas that we've seen over the past year. They've certainly been affected because of the UN relief workers through the UN Relief and Works Agency on the ground in Gaza. But that's in terms of provision of services. It's not in terms of the diplomacy of the United Nations or its Secretary General. So I don't think it has much of the declaration has much of an effect on in terms of diplomacy. The United Nations has never been popular in Israel, so presumably the declaration was made at least to a certain extent to appeal to a domestic audience.
So yes, that is quite true. And also, my last question to you, sir, is that we are just 28 days left from the US elections. It must be a very exciting time for you and also a very stressful time. So my question is that do you think that any kind of leadership change in US will have any impact on the US foreign policy in Middle East or Near East?
I think that if Vice President Harris is elected, we'll see a great deal of continuity from what we've seen in the Biden administration. I think Vice President Harris, in her public statements, has expressed, I think, more empathy toward the suffering of the Palestinian civilians than President Biden has, or at least that he's been perceived to. But I don't think in terms of the substance of the policy, there'll be much difference. If Donald Trump returns to the Oval Office, I think we'll see a continuation of the policies we saw during his first term, which was very strong support from Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular. And I think that it would be, I can only expect that kind of support would continue. But I think either way, Prime Minister Netanyahu is is charting his own course without much consideration to U.S. policy preferences. And I would expect that to continue after January 20th, regardless.
Okay, so the first question is from Gaurang. He's a volunteer. How did you in the office, while your time, view the pre-Arab uprising time in the region? So it started on 18th of December 2010 when Mohammad Bouazizi set himself on fire in Sudi Bouzid. And you were in Tunisia at that point of time.
That's right.
So, and there were few, the fact that he was slapped by a woman police officer and so many other narratives also that came forward. So how did you view it first? And second, do you think that there's a 2.0 of Arab uprisings in the region?
I got to Tunisia in September 2009. It was about 6 weeks before Ben Ali's final presidential election. And we knew that there was a great deal of unrest below the surface. About a year before I arrived in Tunisia, there was significant labor unrest in Gafsa, which is a mining area in the center of the town, not too far from Sidi Bouzid, where, as you pointed out, Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire. But we certainly did not expect it to spread as quickly as it did. From December 17th, 2010, when Bouazizi set himself on fire, to January 14th, 2011, when Ben Ali fled the country, was only 4 weeks. And no one expected the dictatorship to be as brittle as it was, or to fall as quickly as it did. As for the question about Arab Spring 2.0, I would argue we've already seen Arab Spring 2.0. We saw it in a number of places, including Algeria with the Hirak movement protests that were successful to a slight degree, in that Bouteflika was not allowed to run for office again, but then COVID overtook them, so there has not been there has not been a change in the political structure there. We saw protests in Sudan, protests in Lebanon as well. So I'd reformulate the question: will we see an Arab Spring 3.0? I would say yes, because the same grievances that led to the first Arab Spring, that led to the renewal of protests in some countries in 2019, those same set of grievances still exist: lack of good governance, lack of economic opportunity, social inequality, et cetera, et cetera. The question is when, and that I'm not going to hazard a guess, but I think the structural situation in many of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa has not changed, or it's worsened.
Yes, I completely agree. In fact, the cost of living has gone dramatically up.
Mm-hmm.
The socioeconomic divisions are much more radical now. So now you have someone from Pakistan asking you a question. Her name is Nimra. Her question is, how do both sides intend to address long-term security concerns? Both sides are what? Israel-Palestine or Hezbollah in Israel? Anyway, so how do both sides intend to address long-term security concerns such as disarmament of militant groups and protection from rocket attacks without derailing the ceasefire? Can the Palestinian Authority have any role in this?
I don't see the Palestinian Authority having any role. They're certainly, the Israeli government doesn't want to give them a role, and I don't think that the people of Gaza do either. They're pretty widely discredited. I think that to answer the question, I think that was the purpose of getting the ceasefire, was to allow sufficient space to address these questions. What are the long-term what is the long-term security situation going to be in Gaza? How will you ensure that the civilians in Gaza no longer suffer from Israeli attacks? How do you ensure that Israeli civilians no longer suffer from Hamas rocket attacks? So I think that that period of a ceasefire was an essential first step, but thus far for the reasons we talked about at the beginning of the discussion, we have not seen any signs recently that those are going to go forward.
Yeah. And so since yesterday from the Israeli civil society also, there were predictions that Israel is going to attack Iran. IDF has made statements that they are going to attack. When, where, what scale, how, we don't know. No one can obviously predict it. But is the Biden administration, in your understanding of diplomacy, putting any pressure on Israel at all to curtail it?
I don't think that the Biden administration is pressuring the Israeli government not to retaliate in the wake of the most recent ballistic missile attacks by Iran. My guess is that just as we saw with the Biden administration's diplomacy in April, it is more likely cautioning against a major strike that would lead to that would provoke a counter escalation and counter escalation. So, in other words, after the exchange of attacks in April, President Biden counseled Prime Minister Netanyahu take the win. And I think that would probably guide the U.S. diplomacy now as well. My guess is also that the U.S. Administration is strongly advising the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government to make sure they think through the strategic ramifications of whatever they do.
Yeah, because now it has evolved into a seven-front war.
Yes.
And the ramifications on most of these countries are bigger in area and the population also. And the social welfare system within Israel is also crumbling. Those who had to leave their kibbutz and go to safe zones or bomb shelters are still not back. It's 1 year. Their mental health is not well. And there's a massive division now developing within the Israeli society. At the same time, there are fractions within the Palestinian society too. And these are from the extremists to the moderates and all of it. So our last question to you is basically from two of our volunteers. One is Anmol and the other is Bushra. They're basically asking that has United Nations failed Palestine? Or in a statement or in a certain way, what is the meaning of UN resolutions in this day and age anymore?
Well, I think as we see a less consensus among the permanent five members, and particularly between Russia and China on one side and the United States, France, and the United Kingdom on another, there is less and less opportunity for resolutions to go through the United Nations Security Council. Even during the Cold War, when there are obviously sharp divisions between Soviet Union and the United States, there were still many areas where the two then superpowers could work together and work through the UN Security Council. And indeed, as recently as 2015, even though the negotiations were not conducted under the auspices of the United Nations, but we saw the five permanent members of the Security Council unite on a diplomatic initiative that would limit Iran's drive toward a nuclear weapon and or a nuclear weapons program. And so those, as recently as 9 years ago, there was still effective diplomacy being conducted at the level of the five permanent members of the UN. I think now, for a variety of reasons, not just Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing just fewer and fewer opportunities for any kind of agreement whatsoever. So I hate to end on the same pessimistic note that I began with, but I don't see much opportunity for effective diplomacy through the United Nations to address these issues in a diplomatic sense. I think it's very important, though, to remember how much good work is done under United Nations auspices, be it by through peacekeeping operations, including, since we're talking about the Middle East, along the border with Lebanon. I already mentioned the provision of services to Palestinians through the UN Relief and Work Agency, UN High Commission for Refugees, et cetera. So even though there's maybe reasons to despair on the diplomatic side, there's also reasons to appreciate how much good work is being done by UN civil servants in the field.
Yes, in fact, I would like to add that the Irish officials who are serving in the UN in the Golan Heights, they have stated that they're not going to abandon. They will continue whatsoever, and that takes a lot of courage. It's very easy to fall into the rhetoric of critiquing an institution, but UN cannot stop a war.
Right.
Yeah, it has to mitigate the impact of it.
Yes.
We also interviewed the director of West Bank, Kunarba, and he said that there's an 800-year-old hospice in West Bank, which is an Indian hospice, which was established in 1200 AD, which is giving refuge to a lot of Palestinian refugees in West Bank as we speak right now. So the structural difficulties are something which are very invisible to us from the outside. But these organizations are very important to retain whatever order of international law still continues. Otherwise, complete anarchy will, evolve in various ways, and it's anyway is. What do you think is the role of the IPEC lobby and on the election funding, and how is it going to impact Israel's connection with US?
I think that the strength of the pro-Israel lobby has probably been overstated overseas and over the years. I think what we're seeing now, even before the Israeli military operation in Gaza, is a lessening of U.S. support, or I should say unwavering support for Israel among two key demographics. One is the Democratic Party, and part of that is because Prime Minister Netanyahu has been, was pretty open in his support for Mitt Romney in 2012, and he addressed Congress at the invitation of the Republican Speaker of the House without coordinating with the administration to lobby against the JCPOA in 2015 and the like. So he has almost single-handedly turned support for Israel, which used to be very much a bipartisan issue, into a partisan issue that divides Democrats and Republicans. Not to say that Democrat individuals don't have different views, because they do, but I'm making a generalization here. And similarly, all the polling indicates that there is less support for Israel among the younger generation than there was in older generations. So I think those shifts are more important than the effectiveness of one pro-Israel group or another.
Yeah, in fact, there are more than 14 to 15 officials from the Biden administration who resigned.
Mm-hmm.
And we also interviewed the executive director of Dawn, Sarah Levittson, who spoke
Mm-hmm.
about Josh Paul and many others who resigned. Many Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
congresswomen and others have resigned. So there's a shift specifically after 2003 Iraq. For the first
Mm-hmm.
time at this scale, the resignations are happening. So with this, sir, thank you so much for the privilege
It's
of your
been my
time,
pleasure.
and
Thank you for the invitation.
hope we stay in touch. And I hope that you have a beautiful day. You do not take a lot of stress for the elections and
Thank
enjoy
you.
it. And have a good day, sir.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice evening, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.